Good morning. I'm Simon St.Laurent, Senior Editor at O'Reilly Media, Inc. I'm the co-chair of the Fluent conference on exploring the web, JavaScript, and HTML5, and I'm here today with Peter Cooper. Peter is my Fluent co-chair. He runs Cooper Press, which has been running the HTML5 Weekly and JavaScript Weekly newsletters, and that's probably a good place to start. You know, it's a great place to keep up with what's happening in this rapidly changing world, and what kinds of things are making you excited about this space.
Well, as always, a pleasure to talk to you, Simon. And yeah, there are a lot of really exciting things going on out there, and I kind of do relish getting to see all of those each week and being able to share some of them on perhaps one of the oldest internet technologies that exists. So I appreciate the irony in my work. But yeah, I think some of the really exciting things that are happening are exactly what we're trying to do with the conference that we're going to talk about later. And that is the whole thing between different technologies. So it's not just the fact that there's JavaScript out there and JavaScript's a cool language and just that side of it. It is that whole idea of the web platform, I think, is the most exciting part of this. It's the thing that brings everything together and actually gives a practical use for it. Because, technologies like HTML4, for example, existed over 10 years ago, and we had JavaScript over 10 years ago. But in terms of actually merging them together and getting something really interesting out and even having them on mobile devices and things like that, we didn't really have that 10 years ago. So the things that I see now that are most exciting is where we have that base and then we can build new things on top of it. And also, of course, bring in new technologies as well on top of it, like WebGL, for example, the whole 3D thing. We had that base, and then you just bring in WebGL, and it just opens up a whole new thing. So, the good thing now is the web platform, you can add a new technology to it, and it's almost like a multiplier of opportunity. Whereas before, we used to struggle whenever something new would come out.
Part of the fun I've been having lately is in the mobile space, where every time something new gets added to the devices, an API pops up for it. Experimental at first sometimes, but really rapidly connected to the web universe. It feels like there's an explosion out there. It's not just the devices, but the frameworks and the ways that people are looking at these things.
And there's a kind of the thing is though, there are kind of three tiers to it, and I get to focus on the tier, which is this whole idea of new technologies come out, and like you say, experimental things come out, and we can get playing with them straight away because we have those devices, and we're willing to download the latest version of Chrome and Firefox and things like that. And that's all the people that we enjoy and the people that we see at Fluent who tend to speak for us at the O'Reilly conferences tend to be in this kind of tier of people who are doing experiments and are willing to play. Whereas then you kind of have a more middle tier of when things get out to the main marketplace, the kind of the regular folks who are using Chrome and Firefox are on the normal release channel and stuff like that, and it's really fun when you see the stuff from that top tier go down to that middle tier and they can actually start using this stuff in a productive way on the web. But then, of course, there is this bottom tier, and I don't really actually mean it in a bottom as in bad as such, but it is kind of like the pyramid, I guess, this kind of bottom layer where it's everyone that's using the more entrenched browsers, so people that are still on Internet Explorer 8 and things like that, browsers, where WebGL and certain technologies just don't work whatsoever. So luckily I get to operate more at the top end of that, and I know that you do as well with your book editing and stuff like that. That's where the books are being written. But in terms of the excitement of actually being able to use all of this stuff, we do have to remember the bottom of that pyramid as well. And that is probably one of the platforms. So, I said what's cool about it, but that's the uncool side. Whereas, on the client side, if someone's running Windows 8 or, the latest version of Linux or whatever, they can do a certain number of things. But with browsers, it's a bit of a stickier situation to use all the up-to-date APIs. You can't just force everyone onto the newest browser, unfortunately.
No, even looking at the phone I have in my pocket, it's clearly a delay there. The most exciting part for me, I think, I love looking through the experiments and playing with the experiments, but it's that transfer from experimental and weird and unusual to, hey, I can do this, on any even vaguely recent device, or I can upgrade my software and get this whole new set of experiences. So I feel like we have an explosion not just in the experiments, but that those transitions are happening so much faster than they did, even 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, certainly, yeah. I mean, it's sped up a lot. I just think that, like a lot of technologists, I'm kind of itchy just to see everything be everywhere all the time. But unfortunately, that's not the way it goes.
No, no, we get to wait. The cutting edge is cutting for a reason, I guess. We
I think, though, it is cool, though, when you do see technologies that can be used in an experiment, but then they're used in a totally different way when they reach the main marketplace. So with WebGL, people were doing 3D demos, but 3D demos don't really interest the main market, whereas doing like medical visualization and stuff like that is more mass market. So you see things move from experiments into the mass market, but they still get these brand new use cases that even the technologists didn't necessarily think of straight up.
Yeah, and I think about on a slightly less exciting, less graphically delightful category, the stacks that we're starting to see appear in frameworks that take ideas that were common, say in Rails or even before Rails. MVC certainly has roots going back, I think, to Smalltalk.
Mm.
And we're seeing what used to be seen as complex server-side tools arriving in the browser with a whole new generation of frameworks.
So it's a rising tide lifts all boats, I guess.
Yes, yes. I think some of it is just that the computers are faster and the bandwidth has improved, and on mobile it's kind of unbelievably faster. But it's has effects that go well beyond just, hey, this runs faster than it did. So on that note, we're having the online conference for Fluent, April 4th. It's going to be a live online conference. You can see it from anywhere. It will be free. You need to register, but that's all. So we're hoping that the online conference will give attendees a taste of what's to come in the main conference, as well as an opportunity just to join in if you can't make it. We have 4 different talks scheduled at the online conference. They're all pretty different.
Yeah, we were trying to do something that was very representative of the actual real-life event, because obviously we're aware that there's a lot of people that can't go or just don't want to go, because it does require travel and so forth for many people. There's only so many developers in the Bay Area. So we wanted to use this chance to have an online conference to offer something that is just as eclectic as the main event. But of course, unfortunately we can't have like 50, 60 talks all online. That would be very entertaining. So instead we've chosen 4 different talks that will be sort of between 20 to 30 minutes each. And they just cover a really wide array of things. So I think the basic criteria we had was we wanted one that was specifically just about JavaScript, one that covered kind of the node angle, one that covered some kind of framework, so something like an AngularJS or an Ember, and last but not least, something that would cover the HTML5 kind of web platformy side of things. And I know that's a talk that I think you're particularly interested in by Wes Bose, who I think he spoke at our first conference, and people seemed to really like him. So it was great to invite him back, because unfortunately he couldn't make the actual event this year. So that'll be a real treat for people to enjoy.
Yeah, the Wes Bose talk really ties into the hardware device possibilities. Connecting, what was kind of sandboxed JavaScript to the rest of the world has become an ordinary and even exciting part of what we're doing. I've spent a little bit of time with PhoneGap, which is one of my favorite projects simply because it insists that it wants to go out of existence, that the things that it does should become ordinary. And what we're seeing every day is new APIs that connect our devices through JavaScript to the physical world.
Yeah, and we see that with even the more experimental end with robots. And I know that something that is particularly catching people's attention is something called Nodecopter, which is this whole idea of using Node.js and these quadricopters that kind of have the 4 sort of blades at each corner, and you can control them in a very dynamic way. You can say move 10 yards left, rotate 20 degrees, that type of stuff. And people are doing that type of thing from JavaScript now, which is something that even like 5 years ago isn't something that you wouldn't have envisioned. So it's not directly connected to the web platform because we have Node.js is one thing, and that tends to be the server side, the computer-based side of JavaScript. But then you have the web platform-based side of things, which is based around the web browser. So at this point, I don't believe that you can directly control just from JavaScript in the browser with absolutely no real connection, quadricopters and things like that. But it does seem like we are starting to get there, and it looks like Wes Bose is going to talk about that type of thing, finish that circle, as it were, of having the server-side technologies that can talk to devices, but then also being able to do it from the front end as well.
Yeah, kind of a key thing that's happened with JavaScript in the last 2 or 3 years, and it hasn't affected the kind of code most people are writing, but just the having Node available on the server opens up a whole lot of new opportunities to apply the language and bring things back and forth. Node opens a wide range of possibilities. We've covered it at Fluent, even though most of the rest of the conference is the web platform, more browser oriented. And as you mentioned, Node offers kind of a gateway to this other world of computing and connections that we haven't traditionally done through the browser. How do you see that growing? How do you see that fitting into the JavaScript universe?
I'm actually not the best person to perhaps ask about this because I am notoriously a little bit bearish on Node. Yeah, it's interesting to see that crossover, but I must admit, I'm not super bullish about it. I know there are some people that are very, very keen on it and in doing these crossovers, but I kind of have a bit more of a kind of a polyglot kind of approach to this in that, I would be happy to use other languages where they make sense, like your Erlangs and Ruby and so on, where it makes sense on server side. So I don't really buy into that whole JavaScript everywhere promise in quite the way that some people do. So, yeah, unfortunately, it's probably not quite the answer you were looking for, but is truthful at least.
Yes, it is. It is. It's good to have, reminders of that. Having just written a book on Erlang myself, I don't expect to do everything in JavaScript yet. In the online conference, we're also taking a look at the growing stack of frameworks. We have a talk on Angular. Angular is one of a set of framework technologies that we're seeing spread across the JavaScript space. Sort of Angular, Ember, Backbone, Knockout. They're all model view something.
Yeah.
How do you see that particular explosion playing out? I get a sense from some developers that they've found a home and they're happy. I get a sense from other developers that these are all great experiments, but there's still a lot more to play with and try before they find a comfortable home.
Well, I think the current state of play is there seems to be this whole proxy war going on between some of them, and you see it even on Hacker News today. One of the threads on there, while we're actually reading about someone that was trying to use Ember and they couldn't get on with it, and then everyone in the Hacker News thread is like, oh, well, you should use Angular instead. And there's this kind of like weird war going on, but none of the actual core teams are actually directly invested in it. So it's a bit like when we saw different frameworks pop up in other languages like PHP and things like that. There is this kind of war going on. So it seems like eventually, much like any situation, it will settle down. People will get entrenched on their particular thing. So it's like in the Ruby world, a lot of people settled on Rails, some people settled on Sinatra and its various other frameworks. But it seems like we probably will find someone that wins a little bit more than the rest. But because JavaScript is such a large universe, I don't think we'll see it in quite the same way that we did in Ruby land with Rails. It won't be like, AngularJS takes 90% of the market and everyone else is like, fighting over scraps. There is enough difference there, but it seems like another issue, which is, I think, is possibly unique to JavaScript, is that people are actually having the debate over whether JavaScript is the language to even do this stuff in. So there was a discussion on TechCrunch. I know, some people might not appreciate their type of journalism, but there was an article over there that was about, JavaScript just isn't going to be the future of the web, and there was a lot of debate over this, of course, but they were basically saying that as a language, they thought that JavaScript lacked the abilities to be a useful language when you're dealing with code bases in the millions of lines You need a lot of structure and things like that. And that's what these frameworks are trying to do. They're trying to actually make JavaScript suitable as a language for building very large apps. But the real argument they were making was that perhaps, this is where we're going to look at other languages like, and controversy alert, this is where we look at things like Google's Dart language and Microsoft's TypeScript to kind of provide that almost Java-esque fashion of being able to make things more modular and, add static typing and all that type of stuff that it seems that certain types of developer want and which they believe are essential to do large apps. So that's another part of this whole story. Is it the case that Angular and Ember and Backbone are going to have this war and one of them's going to win? Well, maybe, but it seems like will people even be writing those apps in JavaScript, or maybe they end up be using TypeScript and all the various new things that come along in languages like TypeScript and Dart? Are we going to see that? My personal belief is that probably Java continue to win out on this one, just because I think kind of the day of that large enterprisey Java-esque influenced development kind of paradigm has pretty much had its day to a certain extent. But who knows? It's going to be an interesting one to see play out.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Ed Dumble's comment in his Future of Programming piece earlier this year that we have kind of a stack of teacups piled on top of teacups and growing more wobbly. I'm not sure, as I look at the opening lines of a lot of the framework examples, how many different pieces can all be stacked on top of each other at the same time. At the same time, I'm, fairly optimistic about a lot of the compile to JavaScript options that we're seeing. You mentioned Dart and TypeScript. Google Closure, I think, kind of started the trend that way. And I'm seeing more and more small pieces that let you build one thing using a different set of tools and then compile it to JavaScript. CoffeeScript, obviously, I think, got that popularized in the Ruby community and the Python community and elsewhere.
It's going to be interesting to see how this does play out with the enterprise, though, just because they like to think, and they kind of have to a certain extent, solved many of these problems of very large-scale development with their tooling. It's stuff that Microsoft has worked on, Oracle's worked on. It's just Sun obviously worked on until they were acquired by Oracle, of course. But it'd be interesting to see where they kind of plug into this. And there's already stuff going on. It seems like Microsoft is kind of actually leaning more into JavaScript than you would expect them to. They're actually going directly into the language and offering that even on their Azure platform. But then you do see companies like Google and Oracle, and they're leaning more towards the, let's take Java and write stuff in Java and then compile it. JavaScript becomes this kind of just runtime for the web. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I think that's probably one of the bigger battles of the next 5 years. Where are the enterprise developers going to go? Because they can't just keep developing, in the way that they are now. It is going to move more towards the web. But where are they going to go? And I don't think they are all going to become, JavaScript uber geeks like we have now, and all the folks that we like and have speaking at our conferences. We are going to have a lot of these enterprise developers coming on, and how are they going to do it? I don't think they're just going to take up this whole open source, super friendly approach that we see in the JavaScript world right now. It's going to do a lot of growing up, and some of it could be painful.
Yeah, well, even among the companies you mentioned, I think of Google as operating at massive, massive scale, but because so much of their focus is on the public web, it's not enterprise in the same sense that Microsoft, which tends to do a lot of stuff for, what we used to call an intranet, but is now just kind of the core infrastructure of a lot of companies. I see a lot of cross-pollination. I see a lot of different ideas getting floated right now. Not sure which ones are going to take the day, but I do see many, many openings on top of JavaScript right now.
Yeah, I think we will see more movements in the next few years that will allow us to make the crystal ball less fuzzy. It just remains to be seen where companies like IBM and Accenture and SAP and things like that are just like major players at that level. There doesn't seem to be any very specific plan, like we're going to do this with the web platform. It's all piece by piece. But I think we're going to get some bigger stories come out in the next few years on this.
Yeah, I'm seeing even people talking about the browser. Well, we've talked for a long time about the browser becoming part of the operating system and those lines blurring. As I talk to more and more developers, it's becoming clearer that they aren't separating the browser development from the rest of their development. The idea of a desktop application versus a web application versus a mobile application is all becoming a blur, and that's forcing them to look at their tool sets and say, okay, I'm familiar with this, I like this, what can I repurpose from it and keep moving along.
It does seem like most of the builds are more incremental than revolutionary, and I know that's something that we have to try and remember, because when we are experimenting, it's like, this is a revolution, this is a new technology, but the fact is that we think it's a revolution,
Right.
but for everyone else, it's not. You know, when you are at the cutting edge of revolution, but then it passes by and gets dampened down over time, and then becomes a small set of incremental improvements further down the chain. So, yeah.
The things
It's easy for us to be excited about it, but in the real world, you know, it's just going to be small improvements.
Right. The things that seem especially exciting to us become ordinary over time, and that's actually kind of the beauty of it, because once they're ordinary, people can use them.
Exactly.
In addition to the companies that are, building things on top of JavaScript, layering on JavaScript and compiling to it, there's still a really large and active community of people who are kind of the pure JavaScript coders, the people who live and breathe this particular set of syntax and interpreters, life in the browser. We have a this talk for the online conference that actually makes me very happy, because I think a lot of people take this for granted and are unaware of where it can go. We're going to have a lot more pure JavaScript in the full conference. We've seen more and more people taking the language seriously. Some of that was Doug Crockford's The Good Parts, explaining which parts of the language to take seriously. But your polyglot background, I think makes you a really good person to explore how people are coming to JavaScript. Are they really making a serious shift into the language, or is it still kind of an add-on? And how do folks coming from other languages deal with the shift in context?
Well, I got to see the whole Ruby approach to hand, which was very intriguing, because people in the Ruby world had this opinion of, we want to use Ruby all the time. Ruby's an excellent language. It looks really nice. It's pretty. We know how it works, and so we want to write every single thing in JavaScript. Sorry, not JavaScript, Ruby. So they tried to do that, and the Rails frame this system built in called RJS, which allowed you to write JavaScript, things that would occur in JavaScript but in Ruby, and then it would kind of compile that Ruby across into JavaScript. And there's been all sorts of attempts at doing things like that, but eventually it just didn't pan out, didn't work out very well, because there was just a big disconnect between what people wanted to do and what they were willing to offer in the API. And then eventually I was moved more into the CoffeeScript side of things, which is just really an indirect way of writing JavaScript at the end of the day. So I get to see that reluctance, and I know that's something that crops up with people coming from lots of different languages. It's, I'm already doing a certain language. Why do I want to, write another one? And I think part of that has fueled, the motivation for some people to take on things like Node.js, because they think, well, if I'm going to learn JavaScript, then I might as well use it at every single level, and I still get to satisfy that whole idea of I'm going to use one language for this project. I don't necessarily think that's the best way to go, but it's an interesting approach that people have taken. But more generally, I think one of the main drivers of people actually coming into JavaScript is because they kind of have no choice to a certain extent. So they can choose things like CoffeeScript and TypeScript and Dart, but if you look at the percentage that they are used compared to JavaScript, it's still absolutely tiny. So if you do want to do stuff that is on the web platform, it's within a web browser and has those kind of properties to it, you are pretty much stuck with JavaScript. So whether or not you like JavaScript as a language or not, it's kind of tough. You're going to use it. And I know that some of the people that have come in and have those types of complaints some of those complaints are being addressed in ECMAScript 6, which is the kind of the next formal version, the spec that backs up JavaScript. But then also, again, these people that do things like Dart and TypeScript are trying to address some of these concerns. So it does seem like there's a mixture of both. There are some people that are coming in and they're sort of having to learn JavaScript. And I think that's the main majority of the people. But then there are people, of course, that come in and actually really enjoy JavaScript and are surprised by it and actually revel in the language and then want to use it everywhere. And they basically just become a JavaScript fan in the same way that they were a Ruby fan or a C fan or whatever.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we'll have people from all of these different camps at Fluent.
Yeah, and that's why we're catering for them at Fluent, just because there are a lot of events that try to ignore the fact that things like TypeScript exist, but we want to address that because it's very important for the type of audience we want to attract, who are very pragmatic, professional developers, often work for large companies, but they often come from those types of environment where it's all about getting the job done, and they don't necessarily want to learn JavaScript just on its own merits, because when you list JavaScript on its own merits, if you take the browser away, compared to a lot of other languages, there isn't actually a huge motivation, kind of motive for learning it, which is probably the most controversial thing I'm going to say in this video. But there's reasons to learn it and reasons not to learn it, and it's going to be. We really want to cater for those sort of people who are like, oh, JavaScript, but I kind of have to do it.
So I feel like what we're seeing in the JavaScript world is a massive integration of pieces that used to occupy their separate corners. We've got design, we've got interface construction with a variety of different approaches and toolkits. We've got all those connections to the back end, many varieties of those. It's not just HTTP anymore. We've got Node running on the server, giving you connections to all the pieces that really live on that end of the network. And I'm hoping that Fluent will give developers a range of options to explore. It's not that we're giving you a single blessed path that you should take for building your applications, but it's a menu, it's a set of options for people to visit and try out.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what we're offering. We're offering like the full meal, essentially. There's so many different parts of the the whole game really are represented in what we're doing. Even in the workshops, I could see someone actually wanting to come and take every single workshop. It's not even like, people are going to have to struggle to pick between some of them, just because the areas that we covered are so diverse, but are all related to, someone who is working on the front end. There's just a lot of stuff for them there. So that's really what we were aiming to do. And luckily, if they buy the right type of ticket, I believe they can get access to all of the talks and workshops recorded anyway. So hopefully no one will be too disappointed.
I think that's the all-access pass option.
Yeah.
If you're looking for something smaller, a place to taste all of these different pieces in just a few hours, definitely going to recommend the online conference. The Fluent Online Conference will be April 4th, 10 a.m. Pacific, and it's free. So take a look at that and then see if you think that maybe Fluent, the live and in-person conference in San Francisco, May 28th to 30th, is for you. And we hope to see you there.